Hello, this is Someone Guy in Hawaii, and this is a bit of a rehash of my most popular Borderlands 3 video. We're looking at item stat cards, what they tell us, and what they sometimes don't tell us, for two main reasons. One, Wonderlands has things Borderlands 3 does not. And two, I'm already seeing a lot of people making a lot of false assumptions about things on the cards, ascribing significance to numbers they shouldn't, and making decisions to keep or chuck an item based on these assumptions, just like in Borderlands 3. So we'll do an overview of the cards in general and then drill down on four main issues that, in order of importance, are: one, ignore white text that references primary stats. Okay, I'll explain that when we get to it. Two, be aware of important info that sometimes goes missing from the card, or at least from the front of the card. Three, ignore item score. And four, be aware of minor errors in some detail listing. So let's get into what the cards do tell us. Wonderlands has 7 different item types: guns, melee weapons, those are new, wards, which are shields, armor, which are class mods basically, spells, which replace and expand upon grenades, amulets, which are effectively artifacts, and rings. Okay. You click on Inspect to bring up the stat card for any item. All stat cards have certain things in common with each other: manufacturer, item score, item type symbol, price, level required, rarity. Okay. If they have associated elements, that info is normally in the same place down in the middle here. Guns, melee weapons, spells, and shields have specific primary stats listed here. All this stuff up here is standard and fixed for each type. Okay. Melee weapons, spells, and shields also usually have an additional part modifier listing right below the primary ones. Okay. Everything below this line is additional information that can vary from item to item. Legendary and unique items have associated red text here, right up below that line. Sometimes it refers to a hidden ability. Sometimes it has some other pop culture or historical significance. If an item has an enchantment, it also goes here right after that red text, if there is red text. Okay. This white text lists additional information related to various item stats. We will come back to that. Okay. Next, for elemental weapons and spells, a short phrase summarizes the associated elemental effect: slows enemies for frost, highly effective versus wards for lightning, etc. That text will also appear in the associated element color. That's what shows up at the very bottom of this section. Okay. At the very bottom below this line is an optional section that does not appear on all items. It normally contains additional manufacturer and or weapon specific traits. Inferior guns get chucked on reload and explode, shoot at enemies, turn into companions, or some other combination thereof. Okay. Stoker guns normally have an underbarrel attachment. Hyperius deploys a shield when aiming down sights, etc. That info is normally here. This is also where legendary or unique ability info will sometimes go. That's the main tab for the card. In addition to the default inspection tab that comes up, there's sometimes a details tab as well as a parts tab. Details list general characteristics of elemental weapons. Okay, parts show the various components that form the item and how those parts affect various stats and abilities. That's the breakdown. That's the overview. I'm not going to go in depth on any of these. If you play the game enough, these things become self-evident. But I do want to take a closer look at those four issues stated up front. So, number one, ignore white text that references primary stats. Guns, melee weapons, and spells can have additional stat-related information in white text here. Understand, however, that any info here that directly refers to a stat up here is redundant information. This line, for example, says this spell has plus 560% spell damage. Does that mean it gets 560% more damage on top of the listed spell damage stat here? No, it does not. Every item with primary listed stats like this, guns, melee weapons, and spells, has underlying base figures for each stat. Those underlying baseline stats are modified by the various parts that can spawn on the item. And when all those part modifiers are applied to that baseline, we get these modifiers and we get these primary stat numbers. Okay, let's look at another spell. This one has 7 line items down here. 4 of them, however, directly reference stats up here. So plus 20% spell damage, minus 50% spell critical chance, minus 52% spell cooldown, and plus 26% spell status effect damage are already factored into these 4 stats. They don't really provide useful additional info unless you look at parts a lot like me. Okay? These three, however, add useful info not already listed. Minus 35% spell radius, plus 20% to spell critical hit chance, and 4 spell charges are not directly listed elsewhere. This is important info we need to know when deciding to sell, keep, or equip this item. Okay, same thing happens with guns and melee weapons, so understand what's important and what's not in the white text here. Okay. Number 2, be aware of important info that sometimes goes missing from the card. What am I talking about? Well, a bit of history. Borderlands 3 weapon cards are limited to 9 lines of text below this line. And when there's more than 9 lines of info to list, even before they started listing mayhem levels on the card, an algorithm would decide what to keep and what to omit. And sometimes, a lot of times actually, it would keep unimportant stuff like the white text that references primary stats mentioned earlier, and omit really important stuff like critical hit bonuses or zoom levels or consuming more than 1 round per shot. Okay. Wonderland solved this problem by making cards that could expand, that are not limited to a set number of lines. But it still happens on occasion. I'm not sure why. It may be confined to direct transfers of guns from Wonderlands that don't really use new mechanics or parts, just got cosmetic changes, but it does happen. Okay, here are some examples. These 2 Dahlia Nightshade SMGs. This one swaps between 3-shot burst and semi-auto. Dual firing modes is the Dahlia manufacturer's traits. Most Dahlia weapons have this trait, but this one says nothing. If we look at the parts description, however, the swappable firing modes are listed, and the gun does in fact swap between those modes. Okay. There's a Furior pistol that spawns a Hydra on reload. It says so right there in the parts tab, and if we chuck it, we get a Hydra companion. But there's nothing about that down here on the front of the stat card. So again, I don't know how often this happens or why. On the plus side, none of the ones I've found so far have failed to list this stuff that can't be determined by looking at parts like zoom level, okay? But you still have to check parts to know. And the game's only a few weeks old, so I haven't seen everything. My advice is if you're looking for something specific and your desired trait is not listed, check before you decide to get rid of the item. Something to keep in mind, okay? Number 3, ignore item score. I repeat, ignore item score. Item scores are based on level to include any chaos modifiers which boost damage, the presence or absence of enchantments, and maybe one other part-related modifier I've yet to identify. When we look at multiple variants of the same weapon or same item at the same level, we usually find 3 different item scores, and that's it. Any item score, more importantly, has nothing to do with how good that weapon is, either in general or for our particular build. It's not even a good indicator of resale value. Okay, this was the case in BO3, and it's the case in Wonderlands. Ignore it. Okay. Last and least, be aware of minor errors in some detail listings. These are pet peeves that carry over from Borderlands 3. They're minor, and I mentioned them in my last 2 videos, but just in case, most of the detail tabs have issues. Not all of them list damage over time duration, which is 5 seconds across the board. The lightning entry says 2 seconds. It's not, it's 5 seconds. And the entry on frost, while technically correct, is misleading as far as how frost efficiency and freezing works, okay? And there we are, a brief overview of what stat cards tell us and 4 important things they kind of don't. Okay, if you like this content and want to see more, be sure to leave a comment, like, or subscribe. And as always, stay safe, and thanks for watching.